coming back so quickly. I'm now going to give the stand over to Christine, who's going to talk to us about the Everest boot that was developed with the help of SATRA for the first ascent of Everest, which happened 70 years ago. Christine.
Thank you. And talk about imposter syndrome, Vikrant. I definitely am an imposter because I wasn't supposed to be here today on this programme. So don't you worry about it. And the second thing is, completely unrelated, this was left behind last year. And I thought, it sat in my garage for 12 months. And I thought, in the issues of sustainability, somebody might want it back. OK, so it's here if you want it. Anyway. Right. So what we're going to talk about today? Well, actually, it's something I found very interesting personally in the last few weeks, and that will become apparent towards the end of my presentation. Because first of all, I have to give credit to my colleague Tom Bayes, who actually put this presentation together about a year ago. We did it actually as a webinar originally to tie in with 70 years, obviously, with the Queen Jubilee, because it was 70 years since she actually officially became the Queen. And this all tied in at the same time, and it tied in with the coronation, as you'll find out. So Tom unfortunately couldn't step in at the last minute, so it's my job to do that. And what we're going to talk about really is a little bit of a story, and it does involve leather. Obviously, I've got a boot here in front of me, which is an original boot from the Himalayan Expedition collection. So it's now 70 years old. And I'm going to talk about it, and you are very welcome to come and look at it, but please don't handle it because it literally is, you know, very precious to us. And you coming in? No. There's still a few more people. They're just, you know, randomly. Come on, Richard, get your. You know, there's no time, is there? No, it's all, you know. What will be, will be. Right. So actually, let's go back 70 years because something very, very important happened on the 29th of May, 1953. And that is when Sherpa Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary actually were the first people that we know of to set foot on the summit of Everest. And it was the British expedition at the time, even though Edmund Hillary is actually from New Zealand. So we've got New Zealanders in the room today, so I'm sure you're very proud of him and the other party members also from New Zealand. Very combined event, and at this point in time, there'd been that was the challenge, and essentially the British had tried previously. The Swiss were really trying to go for it, and there was every chance. Sorry, Bob, but there was every chance that the Swiss were going to be first. And actually, the British took this as the last chance to be first, if you see what I mean. So they got the permission to go. And they had to do it. They had to achieve it then because they were so close. Other people were so close to getting there. So what we're going to do today, a little bit about the story of it, but more about the boots and the design of the boots and what was important about them. And I want to talk a little bit about their specification because I thought better make this a little bit technical. So all, you know, we're all now bound by specification. So you might be interested to hear what the specification was for these particular boots. And then did they meet it? Did they perform? And a little bit into our archive, we've got a few interesting things to show you. So a little bit about Mount Everest first, because, you know, nowadays everybody goes up Everest, so it would appear. It's actually still a very challenging environment. But of course, in those days, you know, people had been trying to achieve it going back for a long time. We refer to it as Mount Everest. Quite bizarre, it was named after a chap called George Everest, who never ever went to the Himalayas. He was a surveyor in 1868 or something, and his only claim to fame was that somebody in the government decided to name the mountain after him because he did a lot of the work on the measurements. So never been there. So Chomolungma, I think it says, is more the local name. Also, what we've got to think about at that time, Nepal wasn't somewhere you could go easily on your holidays. Because nowadays people can travel. We think about it again, everybody goes to base camp at the very least and has a walk around, etc. You had to get lots of special permission to even go through Nepal, etc. So the whole logistics of this event was huge. They had to choose May because that was probably the last chance to get it up the summit before all the sort of monsoons and the terrible weather started. Historically, around June time, everything goes pear-shaped. And so that's the best weather conditions that they're potentially going to get. Can go down to about -50, so that was important when they were thinking about specification. I think in reality, it ended up being about -27 degrees, which is still, you know, pretty cold. terrific wind speeds. And since over the history that people have been recording horrible facts, but there's been over 300 deaths of people who, just trying to attempt to get up there. And that's not historic. We've got figures here in 2021 for people even then. So, it's not an easy thing to do. And of course, the big challenge when at the top is the altitude. You've got the air pressure is about a third of normal. So the whole thing of breathing and, the whole sustaining life, actually, and particularly 70 years ago, it was absolutely top of the list of priorities. And I say you have the things with the death zone where people literally get so high and then just don't make it back. And so there've been many attempts. There's still, again, the jury's out. Did George Mallory ever get there? Nobody's ever going to know that. And there's this awful fact about people getting things like retinal hemorrhages. There's lots of things that people come back, and the other big challenge was most people don't come back with all of their toes or their feet, or some sort of things go wrong because of the conditions. So this also not only was the last chance to be first, it was also the chance to look at what was actually very, very innovative technology of the day. And so what we're looking at it now with the hindsight of 70 years. Everything that was used then was literally cutting edge, in terms of what was available in the world. And that included the boots, which we'll come on to. So basically, the party set off around about 12th of February. But prior to that, they had to come and do some preparation work first. So I'm going to come to that in a moment. But it was a long journey to get there. It wasn't just a case of jumping on the plane and off you go. You're bearing in mind the actual summit was reached at the end of May. They're starting off around about, say February time, some people by ship. There was certainly a lot of time where people were travelling through India by train and walking and all the porters and the Sherpas, etc. So what we say now is a 10-day trek. They were taking a number of months, and of course had to have the provisions in place for that as well. One thing I found quite interesting, that Edmund Hillary and his father apparently were beekeepers, and each person in the team, in the expedition team, had a job, and one of his jobs was to provide the honey because of the energy they needed. So everybody did something, and I think Colonel John Hunt, who was the leader of the expedition, he looked after the finances and he paid all the porters. Now, the porters insisted that they wanted cash. And so they had to carry, I think it took about 10 porters to carry the money to pay them. I mean, it's an incredible figure like that. But it's things you don't think about, is it? They wouldn't accept notes, they wouldn't accept IOUs, they wanted hard cash. So that had to be factored in. But of course, really importantly, obviously, there's the food, there's the clothing, the footwear, the tents, and oxygen tanks. There was also an opportunity at that point to try out a new type of oxygen tank that had been developed. But one of the expedition, a chap called Tom, I can never pronounce his name right, it's Bourdillon, I think, Bourdillon, and he actually almost made it. If it take about 2 days, there was Charles Evans and Tom Bourdillon. They got to within 200 feet, but they were trying out the new oxygen tanks, and they had some problems with it, getting it set up in the morning. They put them off by about an hour, and that was enough for them not to be able to then achieve it. So I think actually, had it not been for that, the history of who was at the top first would have been different. They had to come back down. The weather conditions became quite poor, and then it was about 2 days later before Hillary and Tenzing were able to go up, and obviously, as we know, they made it. So again, history could have been so different just because of the oxygen tanks alone. So all this is important. But let's think about the footwear, because, excuse me, one thing was critical was things had to be lightweight. Now, I'm going to give you, we had a meeting on the 2nd of October in what was SATRA at the time, 2nd of October 1952. Now, we think about lead times. Their lead time was so short, and what they did was amazing, because on the 2nd of October they all met, discussed what they wanted. By the 16th of October, the first samples had been prepared, and then they were getting them ready to go out to the Swiss Alps, ready for December. They had 4 pairs absolutely ready for testing and doing trials on, and they eventually sent the shipment, which was 33 pairs, which was for the European and the British, New Zealand, European contingent, and for all the Sherpas. the key Sherpas, I should say, and all that was ready by the 16th of January. I mean, it's incredible. And then if you think about the number of people involved, at the time, it was SATRA involved with in terms of the design and working out the technology, and round about 30 local companies who also were providing the materials and putting things together, because we're not a manufacturer, you know, we've always been a research organisation. So it was a huge task. But if I just tell you what they wanted, because in that meeting on the 2nd of October, they sat round and decided what was the criteria for these boots. So this is the specification, and very complex, obviously. Right. Lightness. A weight of 4 pounds per pair should be aimed at. Now, as you can see here, this is one of the original boots, okay? Looks pretty hefty. That's actually a very lightweight boot for its time. Now, prior to that, a typical boot being 6 pounds. So they're already having to take a huge reduction. In the end, they ended up being about 4.5 pounds per pair. So they'd still made, 25% saving. Very, very critical. Had to have a high degree of thermal insulation. And most of the construction design actually hung around this, because the boots we were making were actually for the final assault. They weren't for the whole of the trek up there. They were going to be for the final assault, probably the last 200 or 300 feet. We'll come back to that. They had a suitability for climbing and for the attachment of crampons. Again, you think about all the packed ice, etc. The boots should not freeze solid. The boots were specified for use above 23,000 feet. And it was stated that above this height, the snow would not melt and wet the equipment. However, since the Swiss expedition had found it desirable to use canvas over boots, there appeared to be a possible doubt on this subject, and it was decided to design for some degree of waterproofness. I'll come on to that. Since the toes of the boot might often be used for kicking steps in the frozen snow, they were to be reinforced to stand this. The boots should be easy to put on and lace up under high altitude conditions. Something you don't think about. Actually, this is probably the first time D-rings were used actually in performance equipment. Something you take it for granted now, isn't it? Can you see the laces? There's a little tag on the end of these laces. That was to stop the laces pulling back through the D-rings once they've been laced up, because they were doing this in the freezing cold with great big gloves on. So everything had to be done. And when you're anoxic, when you've got a shortage of oxygen, you also don't behave normally, and you can't think straight. And so all these things had to be capable of being done. So little details, but they were details that were critical. The boots would only be required to stand up to a few days' wear. 70 years on, that's still here. That's something for leather, isn't it? Whatever there was. 2 pairs of thick but light socks would be worn inside the boots. So that is the whole technical specification that we had to work with. Can you imagine that nowadays? Trying to think about what you have to do for a piece of leather, let alone construct something like this. In terms of cost, well, the materials at the time were given, actually. They were donated. So we always say that, the British industry actually, made a huge contribution, because not only their knowledge, but they also gave the boots free of charge. There's even a letter discussing that awkward topic of money and who's going to pay for it. It's very British, actually. There's some letters here that are lovely. The politeness, and we better touch on this subject of money. They worked out about £7 a pair, which is around about £500 a pair nowadays. And I say that, so I'm just probably showing you here. There's a few more things on the picture that's behind me. I say they were designed to be rugged, but not intended to last, because they just wanted to get them to last for the last period. Can you see there's a sort of cover over one of those boots? Well, this was because going back to the specification, they were thinking about how could they make them as waterproof as possible. One thing they did, the leather was glacé-kid, and they did put a rubberized solution on the flesh side, on the reverse side. They sort of tried weighing up this whole thing of breathability and comfort versus getting wet and cold. And so they sort of said, well, we're prepared to, maybe lose a little bit of breathability by from the leather, because it's more important that our feet don't freeze. And so there's a bit of an offset there. But the cover, that was a very, very innovative thing of its time, and it was just a polymer coated fabric. Which again, let's think about when we talk about alternatives to leather. How many people are trying to pass off polymer coated fabrics as leather substitutes? So quite interesting. But at its time, that was a very, very innovative material. And these covers were designed, they were attached to the boot, but once you didn't need them, they were there to peel off. So we've actually got pictures. We've got a boot at back up. We've got a few more at work, so I haven't brought the whole lot. Where when that's actually been used by John Hunt, and you can see where he's peeled off the outer layer once he regarded he didn't need it anymore. So, okay, this is again. These are the drawings at the time, so you can see the picture right here, like the hand drawings. This is the detailed specification, but essentially. Talking about sustainability, previously, every material in here, apart from the polymer coated fabric, would have been a natural material at the time. We've got rubber, we've got felt, we've got something called tropal, which is kapok. I'll come on to that in a moment. We've got the leather. All of these are materials that were available in the industry around that time. And what they did is almost made, insulation nowadays, if you're insulating a house, you have your cavity wall, and sometimes you'll have your insulation between it. It's the same principle. They make it basically like a double-walled shoe. So when somebody said a moment ago, wow, that's huge. It is huge because some of that volume is not just the volume of the foot. It's the volume of this double wall in there. And so, so there's a few more pictures that show it. I'll come on to it in a moment. So, but the key thing for keeping the foot insulated was the use of a natural fibre called Tropal is the trade name, and it was sold under that. It was donated by Tropal, but actually it's a kapok is a tree. It's found in a number of regions, but particularly in sort of like the tropical forests. They live a great time, up to 300 years. They're very large trees, and they have a strange property in that, rather like cork, they have a hydrophobicity, and so very, very good for keeping the foot warm, but also having moisture resistance as well. It's even used, once upon a time, it was used in life vests because it has a natural buoyancy as well. So again, lightweight, but insulating. And so this became a very critical component. And you'll be pleased to see, you can have a look at this again. Okay, so this is one of the boots, but literally cut in half. So now you can really start to see the construction. And this is the tropal here, this fibrous layer here. Well, it's not one layer, there's actually 6 layers of this in there. But you've got the rubber here, you've got the rubber on the sole. You can see there, yeah, the 6 layers of tropal showing up on the picture there. And then we've got inside, can you see on the picture there, there's a felt, like a perforated felt. So just a wool felt. Again, to help trap the air and keep the feet warm, but also to some degree the breathability and the comfort and having some sort of padding underfoot. You've got extra leather, you've got another sort of like a leather inner sole, as well as the outer being leather. So you've got your rubber, and then you've also got the felt, and then you've got leather again. Shown here. Yeah, again, you can see this this felt and how it's all been attached, and all the layers of the tropal that are attached over it. So then you come into your leather. You've got this rubberized coating on the back of the leather, and then you've also got like a wax cotton in there as a lining as well. So there's an awful lot going in there, but I say very, very complex construction. There's again the boot showing you with that outer cover I was mentioning. So you can see there the fabric side of that. And again, we have got one of the prototype back at work, where we've actually still got the original covers still intact on there. And this one, I don't know if you see the detail, because you can see where this is where they've peeled off the. Can you see the little bit of fabric showing just on that edge? And that's where they've peeled off this outer coating covering. So you can see it's like a knitted fabric with the polymer coating on it. Right, just a little bit about the expedition leader, actually, because John Hunt was a military man, and he was literally brought in at the 11th hour. Previous expeditions there had been a chap called Shipton, and for whatever reason there was certain things happened, and very short notice they decided they were going to change who was the leader. And John Hunt, actually, recently I've had the privilege of speaking to his daughter, and she provided me with this photograph because she said, oh, well, I've got a picture of him when he was about 80. He wanted to try one of the, because we've got his original boot still. And she said, well, somebody lent it to us and he was able to try it on. And so I thought, oh, please can I have a copy of the picture for my archive, because that would be, great. So so he was the leader of the exhibition. He later became Lord Hunt, I think in recognition of what he did. But what I was fascinated by, and I'm going to have to appear here, was the letters from him, because on the 27th of February, so remember now, you've just got to Kathmandu, wherever you are, you're in the middle of preparation, and you take time to write a letter to SATRA, okay? And it says here, dear sirs, before leaving for India on our way to Everest, I want to tell you how very appreciative we are of the 1953 expedition, of your generosity and hard work in contributing to our equipment and provisioning. We shall certainly be reminded of your kindness as we use these things on the mountain, and I will have no doubt that they will help us to achieve our aim. Isn't that lovely? And then afterwards, there's a copy of our SATRA bulletin in July. So after they've returned, so dear Mr. Bradley, who was the director, would you please convey to the SATRA Council and staff our thanks for their kind telegram of congratulations. I'm sure you will be glad to know that the boots were a great success and were worn constantly by all the party from 20,000 feet, Camp 3 upwards. Isn't that lovely? That so you actually got those sort of personal details coming through. So okay then, so actually then, let's think back to modern days. Were they as good as we hoped they were going to be? Because the verbal reports and the letters they've written from the expedition people at the time all suggest that they were successful. But obviously, being SATRA at the moment, we do footwear testing as a key part of what we offer, and we work a lot with performance brands. So we have a test where we can actually look at the thermal insulation of products, of footwear, obviously that's being developed nowadays. And in fact, we've developed our own, if you go and buy a duvet, you get like a TOG rating or, on your bedding, and it tells you how warm your duvet is going to keep you. So we've got a similar thing where we can look at some footwear and basically sort of give you a measure of what is the lowest temperature you can go down to, depending on your level of activity. So, for example, if you've got a boot, I'll just say a hiking boot, okay, but you are sitting by a river fishing all day, and it's it's going to be a cold day, you have a very low activity level, so your feet are going to get cold very quickly unless you've got a very good insulating boot. Now, were you similarly hiking wearing the same boot, it'll be much more comfortable because you're active. So what we do is we try and assess the lowest temperature that your footwear can go down to, and your foot still remain comfortable depending on what level of activity you're doing. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so again, I say, as we've got a number of these, and we have still got some that are the original ones that were just for sort of prototyping, we decided we were going to do this test on the Himalayan boot, the Everest boots, and see were they good enough. We think they were, but were they? And so I say the test is called Determination of Whole Shoe Thermal Insulation Value and Cold Rating. And this is the results basically for the Everest boot. And essentially what it's telling you is that high activity levels, which obviously climbing levels I think would be fairly active, wouldn't it? It would take you down to minus 50.7 degrees and still have your foot comfortable. So it's quite interesting to know that we thought they didn't have the means of doing all this 70 years ago, but nowadays we can test it. And yes, they were designed, and all the technology they used then obviously meant they had a boot that was perfectly able to meet the conditions that they were in. We've also been sort of digging through our archives just to see what else is in there, because what's fascinating is they kept things. I mean, you can see samples here of the fabrics that they were testing, of the leather that they were testing. At the time, we didn't have our own climatic chamber. We do now, but so the boots were taken to Farnborough, I think, in the 50s, and they were sort of taken down to really low conditions with somebody wearing them then to see what they were like. So we've got all this information. You've got boxes of things at work, which is fascinating. These are how did they actually get the sizing right? because the boots were made and they varied between size 4 and size 12, and each boot was made for the individual. Now, obviously, going back, I can't look at Steve because it's New Zealand, but going back to Sir Edmund Hillary, well, he wasn't present in the meeting, so basically somebody drew around his foot, and that's what we used. And that's what we used for everybody. Each member of the expedition party, we've got a drawing of their foot and then measurements against it.
With socks on.
So with the socks on, 2 pairs of socks on, remember your specification. Okay, important. What about your Sherpas? And interestingly, the Sherpas have got completely different sizes. Most of the average Sherpa was about size 5 or size 6 in UK sizing. And so they just took a bit of a random approach and said, we've got an awful lot of them. We didn't make for the 300, I say it was only for the ones going particularly on the fire and the salt part. But apart from tensing, he wanted his own boots. He did wear his own boots, and they were deerskin, I think. So they were probably reindeer skin, sorry. But apart from that, everybody else wore the boots that were made in North Kettering. So we've got all these drawings. I mean, they're all there in a box, and you look at them and you think, this person has stood on this bit of paper, you know, in their socked feet and been drawn around. And from those few dimensions, they've produced these boots. Can you imagine trying to do that nowadays, you know? And so, say, John Hunt and Edmund Hillary, they were both size 12, so they were the largest ones, and there was everything in between. And they say they were all made, so they had 33 pairs eventually went off, all bespoke for the individual climbers, purely based on a drawing around a foot that you do at school. You know, it's that sort of thing, really. Here's the bill of materials. So again, everything's detailed. It's every bit of leather, every piece of felt, how much we got, who provided it. All of the companies were acknowledged, you know, ultimately at the end of the expedition, as to providing all these things, all worked together. Great, you know, a great example of collaboration, isn't it, if ever there was, and the timeliness, you know, how quickly they did everything. So we've got a few other items as well, because you remember we said about some over boots. When they got to the top, they tended to also have some canvas over boots. Some of the pictures you see from the National Geographic. Unfortunately, I had to take some pictures out of here that we weren't technically supposed to use. So, didn't say that, did I say that? No. My colleague was a bit enthusiastic trying to put in lots of things. I said, you can't use those because they are National Geographic, but anyway. But these are our pictures because we've got all these in the cupboard at work. So, and the crampons, we've got a couple of different sorts of crampons that they used. And of course, the boots, you know, had to have the crampons fitted onto them as well and not damage the boots, etc. So lots of things to consider. Things can continue actually, because having been successful. No, first of all, I'm just going to read you. How am I going for time? Somebody tell me.
We're at the end of the.
Am I wrong?
Yeah.
Can I got 5 minutes?
Yeah, you're 5 minutes.
Because I just think this is a letter from, remember I said Tom Booderland, the one who almost got there first. Now, he wrote a letter when he came back. So this was dated October 1953. That's a little bit long, but I'll be quick. Dear Mr. Bradley, I owe you my most sincere apologies for not having replied to your letter before. When we came back from Mount Everest, I found an enormous pile of correspondence waiting for me and were coming in daily, and I fear that I sank beneath the flood. You would be a bit busy, wouldn't you, if you'd just done that, I would have thought. The high altitude boots were extremely successful, so much as that at no time during the first assault can I remember either Evans or myself suffering from cold feet. And as you will know, there were no feet frostbitten through the whole expedition. This is exceptional in very high altitude climbing, and we are all very grateful for it. You may well have considered a considerable number of inquiries for high altitude boots in the future, I think. And in case it is of interest to you, I should like to mention 2 ways in which they might be further improved. And I think they're great to get feedback from somebody who's done it, you know. The outer vapour barrier is at present liable to tear, particularly if one is sufficiently anoxic to be very clumsy with one's crampons. One has to be careful with one's crampons at all times, obviously. When it is torn, snow packs between it and the leather of the boot proper, and in time the boot gets wet. It would seem desirable to make the outer surface of the boot water vapour proof, instead of having a separate rubberized outer cover, since this would be much less likely to catch in a crampon and perhaps could be stronger. So I think it's really, relevant feedback, isn't it? The other point is that the boots are not very suitable for delicate climbing. They tend to roll on the foot. This is probably inevitable if the boot is sufficiently loose to avoid constricting the foot, but it might be possible to lessen the tendency by bringing the boot slightly higher up the ankle and stiffening it there. I think your achievement in producing the boot is a great one, and one that was vital to the expedition. It is certainly by far the best high altitude boot I have yet heard of, and is the reason why all of us still have our feet. So that's rather lovely, isn't it? And then to go on, so even when they came back and they were successful, you think you'd have enough by then, wouldn't you think? So it's time for a rest? No, Edmund Hillary then carried on going back into the Himalayas because he had a few of the mountains he wanted to work on and so on. So in 1954, as you can see here, the different chap called Norman Hardy, who wasn't in the 53 expedition, he went at that time. And again, he's saying, although the rubber tread worn off, they still have excellent insulating properties. And again, he had to keep his boots on longer than expected, and he actually found them too hot. He says, as we would expect, were far too hot at lower altitudes because they were really just designed for that, say, that top part. This is a letter from Edmund Hillary with a nice little handwritten note on the end. It says, take note, could you advise me where the boots could be made commercially and the likely cost? Because he took a whole load again for the 54 expedition and thought, these were the way to go now for the future. So that's really nice to have. So 70 years on, just to sort of wrap up, what happens next then? Well, I had a chance email from the BBC one day saying which Country File programme, those in the UK will know Country File, and we're doing a programme about extreme weather, and we think you've got a climate chamber that we can test some clothing in. It's all to do with Everest and 70 years. And I went, do you not know that we've got the boots? And he went, oh no, we didn't know that. So suddenly they got a bit excited. Anyway, long and short of it, they came and did a programme which went out on the 26th of February. So it's on iPlayer if anybody hasn't seen it and might see it. And they came and spent the day with us, and it was brilliant. And Ellie Harrison was their presenter. And what they did is, as part of the day, took her into our climate chamber and gradually took her down to minus 27 degrees. So they could replicate, well, they did it in stage because it was a February day. So it was about 5 degrees outside, started there. Then they took her down to what the temperature would have been at base camp. And then they eventually took her down to minus 27 to see what it was like at the top of Everest. So she could actually feel for herself what it was like. And I thought good on her because she was in there, the camera, the producer was also the cameraman. They both stayed in there for a half an hour and, froze themselves a bit. So that's available to watch, if anything. As a consequence of that, this is how I got to have a conversation with John Hunt's daughter, because she saw the programme and then sent an email saying, oh, in London, they're going to be doing all these anniversary events. Can we borrow the boots? So just to give them a little bit of promo, because a charity, and she's part of the charity, the Himalayan Trust. And so anybody's interested in going, they've got a number of events on the 13th of June, where they've got Sir Edmund Hillary's son, Peter, and Tenzing Norgay's son, can't think of his name, but they're actually speaking. And they also people like Ray Mears speaking, and there's a whole programme of things going on. So we're going to take things and do a bit of a show and tell while we're there. But it's really good value. It's about £12. I mean, to go into the afternoon, and they're doing sessions really trying to promote to young people. But anybody can go. And then in the evening, they've got another series of lectures in the evening, and it's about 35. But it's a charitable thing. All the money is going towards actually building up the communities and schools in the Himalayan valleys where all the trekking things go on. So anybody wants to know more about that, just ask me. But anyway, that's the story. So thank you.